everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Her Faith Inspires podcast, where we take cultural issues and tackle them with biblical truth. Today, I have a listener requested episode for you, and this listener contacted me through Instagram with a couple of questions on two different occasions, and I thought the questions were great, and I've been meaning to get to this episode, and so now we're going to do it right before the Christmas episodes. So I hope that this will be an encouragement to her and to all of us ladies who are, in the role of wife, mother, and just maybe even thinking about that next step in life where we become a wife. So I hope that this will, like I said, help you. And she also had questions about being a quote unquote good wife, comparing ourselves to the Proverbs 31 woman, and even asked me about men, within our culture who are being encouraged to not act like men, and what I have to say about that. Now, I could probably do an episode on each of those topics because they are heavy within themselves. And I have tackled these issues sporadically over the last couple of years. So you can go find other episodes in the past that I've done with my husband. And you can see that I did Man Up Lessons from a Boy Mom, where I talked about some of these things. Like I said, we talked about egalitarianism versus complementarianism. I'd done things on feminism before. If you want to listen to those, just go back and look through the titles. But I wanted to specifically take some of the teachings that I put into my Reflections of Eve Bible study and draw those out in today's episode. Now, for those of you who are like, what? You wrote a Bible study? I did a few years ago, and I have a bit of a disclaimer about the study because, like I said, it's been a few years, and if I could go back, if I had to do it all over again, there are some things I would definitely change. I'm not going to say that I love all of my theology in it. There's things I would definitely clean up, things that I would make deeper, questions I would reframe. And because I say this often, I'm not always fond of Bible studies per se. I feel like they don't go deep enough, and the writer leads you to how they maybe what path they want you to take down in that lesson. So yeah, that's just my disclaimer. So I would rather go back and clean up some of my theology in that book before I recommend it. I just haven't had a chance to yet because I am so busy with other things. So if you get the book, or if you've gotten the book, or you're curious about the book, I plan to update it soon. I hope to get to it eventually. It is on my to-do list. Okay, so I just want to embed more apologetics concepts into that, maybe even throw in some feminism ideology and why it's in conflict with the biblical worldview. But I have to get to it. But before we get into the episode today, I do want to remind you of the Patreon account that I now have for members who get exclusive content. You're going to find that link in the description. And if you want me to send it to you directly, you got to email me at hello@shandafulbright.com. But we're getting ready to start our book club on December 1st for all of the members. We're voting on that right now. And then we have a private Facebook group and lots of extra content. I have Revelation study on chapters 1 through 3 in there for free right now. So if you want to get on the inside, I'd love to see you on the inside. And then one last thing, Let's Get Real for 6th through 8th graders, examining the evidence for God. We take you through all of the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist curriculum. We're starting that again February 6th. So go to onlinechristiancourses.school if you want to sign your child up for that. All right, so what does it mean to be a good wife? And again, if you're going to say, I want to be a good wife, we have to assess what we mean by good, right? What do we say? What does that word good embody when you think of, I want to be a good wife, or how do I be a good wife? And so specifically, how do we live up, or are we supposed to live up to the Proverbs 31 woman? So I want to draw out Proverbs 31. I want to take a look at how God has made the woman in general, and then we're going to go from there. So obviously, when me saying that, we want to take a look at the woman in general. All of a sudden, we've just made this controversial today in our culture. Who would have thought, even when I wrote Reflections of Eve, the culture wasn't like this with all the transgender, non-binary terms, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to discuss all of this to understand your role as a wife. And you have to understand your role as a woman first in order to understand your role as a wife. You have to understand your role as a woman before you can understand your role as a mom. So we're going to break that down. And then next, we're going to talk about what it looks like to be a godly wife. And then finally, we'll talk about why feminism is in conflict with biblical womanhood. And I'm adding this in because I think it's important to understand why we're even having a conversation about what it means to be a godly wife. And feminism has played a role in why women don't like the examples in the Bible and, you know, what it means to be a godly wife. Because I've said this before on different occasions and in different situations, culture affects the church. And feminism has affected how women in the church view themselves. And looking and reading the Bible, we go into it with that perspective that the Bible doesn't speak well enough on behalf of women. And then you get us adopting feminist ideologies, okay? So we'll get into that. So the first question we're going to ask is, what does God expect from women, and how did he make us different from men? Well, there are a few things I wrote in here that ring truer today than they did only a few years ago in Reflections of Eve. And first, women are still fighting today for what they already have. They're fighting for what they already have, especially in the United States or in the West, because we don't have the culture like the Middle East. Women aren't looked down like they are in the Middle East. So women in the West are still fighting for what they already have. I just don't think that they realize they have it. We're created in the image of God just as much as men. You know, who are we trying to convince of our worth? Because God doesn't need to be convinced. Okay, we're not having to convince the creator of the world. He created us with inherent worth. He made us equal in value because we're created in his image. Now, if you want to say women aren't equal in value because they don't have the right to abort their babies, well, then we have to get into the abortion debate, right? If you're going to say that women aren't equal to men because there's a wage gap or something to that effect, then we'd have to look at that data and the stats on, you know, women in the workplace and things like that. But we don't have time to go into stats on that. We don't have time to talk about the abortion debate. I do have a podcast episode on that. But if we're going to talk about our rights and how our rights distinguish our value because of wage gaps and abortion rights and all that, we'd have to discuss that. And we also need to determine what a right is. And I talked about that on my episode with Katie Faust. It was at the beginning of 2022 it's called Them Before Us. Okay, so we have to understand why people say women aren't considered equal. And so what I wanted to do also is read to you the beginning of Reflections of Eve. This is the first page, and what made me write this study. And this is why I said not much has changed in the last few years as far as, like I said, the terminology of binary and transgender issue and all that kind of stuff has really magnified. But the issue is still the same. And here's what I mean. This is what I wrote. It was Christmas Eve, 1985, and we'd just gotten home from one of my favorite traditions. Visiting my Nana was something I looked forward to every year. And it was just as hard to sleep the night before going to her house as it was to sleep at home on Christmas Eve. However, what was about to happen next was going to put a damper on my night. My mom called me into her room and asked me to sit down on the bed. I wondered what was so serious. It was Christmas Eve after all. Shanda, tonight at Nana's, the family noticed you're starting to develop. I think you're going to need a training bra. I sat on her bed, speechless. It only took a minute before I burst into tears. I don't want to wear a bra, I cried. My mom told me not to worry about it. She didn't want the fact that I was starting to get boobs to ruin my Christmas. Well, it was too late. All I knew is that I didn't want to be a girl. God, why didn't you make me a boy so I don't have to deal with this girl stuff? Thank God I wasn't living in 2022. Okay, that's my note. That was a long time ago. And since then, I have realized that I am one of God's greatest creations, and so are you. We are women, and we should walk confidently in who we are and who we were created to be. By the way, I was 10. I do not think I was developing. I think I was the oldest and only one of two girls, and they were just super excited about me getting older, but there's no way. Anyways, back to the intro of the book. Why Reflections of Eve? Nowadays and in times past, women have fought for equal rights, fairness in the workplace, and to be noticed and valued by men. At the same time, we fret over laundry and contemplate the purpose of our lives as we clean urine off the toilet seat for the 5th time in one day. Yes, I am a boy mom. Friend, we don't have to fight for what's already ours. God has ordained and appointed women to have a special role in this world. He has designed us with great purpose and to be a gift to the men in our lives because they literally can't live without us. Sadly, many women don't see this. We spin our wheels and we carry our picket signs to try and convince the world that we are worth it. When will we walk confidently in who we are because of who He created us to be? The first step to embracing who we are as individuals is to embrace our purpose as women. If we can do that, I believe God will give us a greater understanding of His individual purpose for our lives as we move forward from this moment on. The reality is we are daughters of Eve. Women are made in the image of God, but we will find many inherited traits from Eve. Just as we inherit natural traits from our birth mothers, there are things God put into Eve that have followed her bloodline and entered our personalities, physical attributes, and sadly, our fallen nature. And let me make this side note. God didn't give us Eve's fallen nature. That's what happens naturally when you come from someone's lineage and work from her lineage. So together we will examine the traits we have received from our mother Eve through God's word. And Eve was the only perfect woman to ever walk the earth. And there will never be another woman created with her innocence, her purity, her beauty, and her perfection. But that doesn't mean we cannot draw on her strengths and learn from her mistakes. So again, that's what we talk about in Reflections of Eve. And that's what I wanted to draw out in today's conversation. Because in Reflections of Eve, I mentioned that Eve was the only perfect woman to ever walk the earth. And here's the thing. You will never be perfect. I will never be perfect. And I've tried. I still try. When you put makeup on those little crow's feet on your eyes, you're trying to be perfect because you're trying to hide the wrinkles, right? I mean, we try to be perfect and we're just not going to be because we fail. And I've learned not to spin my wheels fighting that battle anymore. I mean, yeah, I'll put concealer on my crow's feet, but when it comes to failing in the home or whatever, I still don't like it, but I have to learn that we are never going to be perfect. You know, with the rise of Pinterest and social media and magazines and Hollywood, keeping up with the Joneses, it is a real thing. Those things have caused us to compare ourselves to other women who make being a wife and mother look like the most beautifully decorated home or the best dinners. And we have to put those things in their rightful place. They're just pictures and posts and not daily realities. No one can keep up with that. That's why it's a picture, so it lasts forever. And we know this, right? Like we understand that in our heads, but it's really difficult when it happens and we start to compare. And it can cause us to question if we're doing it right. And so I think Eve had it much more difficult than we did. And here's why. She was perfect and she lost the perfection. We're striving for perfect, but we know we're not going to attain it. So let's establish these two truths right now at the beginning of this conversation. You're valuable, just as valuable as any man in your life, because you're made in the image of God, but you're not perfect and you never will be. Okay, so if we say, how can I be a good wife, and we're equating that to perfection, you're going to have to reconcile with that because it ain't happening. And if you always try to strive for a good wife being a perfect wife or a good mom being a perfect mom who never yells and loses her cool, you're already failing because that's an unrealistic expectation. Okay, so let's establish that you're equal because you're created in God's image and there's nothing you can do to lose that. You're always going to be created in His image. But you're never going to be perfect and God doesn't expect you to be. And if you have that expectation, wrestle through that until you lower your standard on yourself. And that sounds terrible, but I don't mean like, all right, I'm going to be a hot mess today. And we do talk about this hot mess situation soon. I'm not giving you the permission to be a hot mess. I'm just saying you're going to have to reconcile that you'll make mistakes. Okay. And also in Reflections of Eve, I discussed two kinds of purpose. And I feel like this is helpful. There's inherent purpose, like what you're born with, what's innate, what's natural to every woman. And then there's assigned purpose. And I don't really know if I necessarily call the assigned purpose part assigned or not. I don't think every occupation or thing we choose to do is assigned by God necessarily. It could just be something that we choose But either way, for the sake of argument, I'm going to call it assigned purpose because that's also what's in the book, okay? So inherent purpose are those things that make us women, like they distinguish us from men. Only women can reproduce and have children. Not all women are able, and not all women choose to, but only women can. Now, that's going to make people who think that gender is just something that you are, assigned with or whatever. No, biologically, truthfully, fundamentally, rooted in reality is the fact that only women can reproduce and have children. That's it. Now, some women are more nurturing than others. I'm not talking about that. The ability to have children and birth children, that's our inherent purpose. That's inherent to every woman, okay? And I'm not going to get into degree of nurturing or who's going to have a baby, who can't have a baby. I'm generalizing this because no matter what, if you can say this woman is sterile and she can't have children, okay, I understand, but no man will ever be able to have children. So this is only something women can do, even if they can't, they don't have the ability because their bodies aren't working in that way or because they choose not to, okay? The fact is only women can have birth, give birth, have children, contrary to the cultural narrative. And I'm not going to degrade women by calling them anything other than women or moms or wives, because only women own those terms. Only women can be wives. Only women can be mothers. Okay? I will not lower women to birthing persons or menstruating persons or people with vaginas. When I say woman, WOMAN, it embodies all that I've said so far because God set the boundaries within creation. There are just some things human beings will never be able to do if it's outside of those boundaries. And men having babies is one of those things they will never be able to do. Okay? Second, the woman is the helpmeet of her husband. Now, you can do a word study on helpmeet. I recommend that you do that. You'll see some of the ancient Hebrew terms, what it means, how it brings such a depth of understanding to what that actually means, that she's not secondary, she's not an afterthought. Now, Eve was created last. You have God creating all of the things in creation. He creates man and the animals on the sixth day. He rests on the seventh day, but he creates Eve after even the animals, not because she's an afterthought. But here's the beauty of this. God specifically took Adam through a process of naming the animals. And he allowed Adam to name the animals, which is great. And he's with Adam every single day. But he takes him through this process because if you read Genesis and you look at Genesis 2, where it says after he named all of these animals, Adam begins to understand like, hey, they all have each other. I don't have anyone. Like I have God, but it's not the same. And God concludes that it's not good for man to be alone. So again, Adam had God, and technically he wasn't alone if you want to think about aloneness. So what does that mean? It means that Adam was above the animals because God gave him dominion over them. And it means God was above Adam because he created him and he was God. But that leaves Adam, who has no one comparable to him. And so that's where Adam begins to feel his need and feel the loneliness of being by himself with no companion. So God gives him a helper comparable to him, which is his wife Eve, but not without first taking Adam through the process of realizing that's what he needed. And to make him feel that need to where when he sees Eve, he can say, oh my gosh, this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. And he took her and he loved her. So that alone shows a woman's worth because of the process God took Adam through in order to show him his need for his wife. And God literally made him feel that loneliness, to feel that desire for her, to where he appreciated her when she came along. Now, when I teach women this concept, when I've talked about this in Bible studies, that she's her husband's helper, that God gave her to him, that some would get offended. And it was, I'll be honest, it was mostly the single ladies who didn't understand what it was like to choose the one man. And, or it could be the women who didn't respect their husbands for some reason. But here's my thought. If you chose to marry this man, to stand before God and say your vows, why wouldn't you be proud to be the one to stand beside him as his helper? It's one man, not all men, that God has called you to be this for. And if you can't do that with the guy that you pick, don't pick him. Don't marry him, because you have that choice, right? So physically, women are built differently than men. That's obvious, right? I mean, again, it's generalized. I have seen there are some women that are bigger than men, but overall, generally, men are bigger than women. Women are more delicate. We're weaker. The Bible speaks of this. And being weaker than my husband, it doesn't bother me. Now, it may bother other women. I don't know, but it doesn't bother me. And in reality, I like it that my husband's stronger than me. I want to feel safe when he's around. I love that he knows how to protect our family, that he knows how to, do things around the house that I do not know how to do. And I'll be honest, I don't want to do it. I don't want to take hammers and nail stuff to the walls. I don't want to. I don't want to do the plumbing stuff. I don't want to unclog my sink. I'm happy I have a man to do that. And the reality is that there aren't a lot of women who will readily admit that they want a weaker man, or that they don't care if their man is weaker. There's not a lot of women. That's just not the reality. Women generally don't like the thought of that. And we see this in the workforce too, right? More women take on the nurturing careers, nursing, teaching, caregiving. And there are men in these positions too, again. But tell me the last time you drove past a construction site and saw a woman with a hard hat on on some sort of lift and putting on a roof, or working the machinery. Again, I'm not saying that there aren't any. I'm just saying there aren't many, and they would be noticeable if you did see that. I don't see female plumbers. I don't see female concrete finishers, and my husband owns a concrete company. And, listen, ladies, I don't blame you if you don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. That's hard work. I see these guys busting their butts working very hard, and I respect that so much from them. But that is why God designed men's bodies to handle that kind of labor, and our bodies are designed to bear children. Okay, our bodies are designed to bear children. I know I just said another sentence that's going to be controversial to some women, like, how dare you say that women's bodies are designed to bear children? Well, we need to get over that, because only women can have children. So our bodies are designed to bear children. Now, I've only had 3 children. My body can do other things, but we're not busting out babies every 9 months. I'm not saying that, but our children are dependent upon us, and we are designed to carry them. We're designed to give them life and after and nurse them and things like that. Yeah, I don't know why that's controversial, but some women don't like it. And in fact, I saw a post on Facebook the other day that said women who say they don't want to put their children in childcare because they don't want someone else, quote unquote, raising their children is so offensive. Like, ladies, get over it. And then the woman argued that just because, her kids go to daycare doesn't mean that her children are being raised by that person. I agree. It doesn't necessarily mean they're being raised by them. I mean, just because they go to school every day doesn't mean that the teachers are raising your kids. However, my question is, what do you mean by being raised by them? How many hours are they in daycare under the influence of someone outside your home compared to how long they're with you and under your influence? So that's what I'm saying. Who's getting the greater amount of influence on our kids if we're allowing them to go to what public school or daycare, or where are they going? How long are they spending their time? And I don't know why feminists diss motherhood so much, or diss those who enjoy being a mom and want to be with their kids. But just because you choose to put your kids in daycare doesn't mean somebody else chooses to stay home with them. And by the way, that's exactly what I said. I said exactly what she hates to hear. I chose to teach part-time and took non-contracted positions because I didn't want anyone, quote unquote, raising my kids. And I had a lot of family support. Or maybe a better way to say it was, I wanted to be the one who heard them say their first words. I wanted to watch them take their first steps. I wanted to be the one who put them down for naps, fed them, changed their diapers, took them to school, did their homework with them, helped them brush their teeth, learn their ABCs, and do all the things moms do. And here was my reasoning. Because one day they'll be grown, but the job will still be there, and I'll still have the opportunity to work. And guess what? They're 19, they're 17, they're 12, And I am so glad that I did that because I have no regrets. So our inherent purpose as women is to be fruitful and multiply, to bear children, and to rule and have dominion over the earth. And, we have influence and we have purpose based on those two inherent purposes given to us by God. Now, assigned purpose, or what we choose to do with our talents and gifting God has given us, is what we choose to do within our careers or our volunteer time or our ministry work. So, for example, I'm a teacher. That's what I do. I teach on this podcast. I teach kids. I teach adults apologetics. That's my assigned purpose. And you might choose to homeschool, or maybe you're a nurse, or you work in an office, or you do hair. Whatever your role is in this world, where you use your gifts and talents, is your assigned purpose. You might even switch that purpose from time to time. And this is where we can skew our identity, right? We can skew our identity by getting so wrapped up into our assigned purpose. And I've done this before. I sometimes forget my inherent purpose and I make my assigned purpose my identity because I want to become known by that, or I do become known by Shanda, the teacher. And in reality, our inherent purpose is the thing that never changes, while our assigned purpose can and does change throughout our lives. So especially as our family grows, right? Or as we figure out what we want to do, because sometimes we change things that we're interested in. It's important not to allow what we do to become our identity instead of who God has made us. And inherent purpose is also your special gifts and your talents that God has given you. You might be gifted at being organized or compassionate or hospitable, and those things will reflect what you choose to do with your assigned purpose and like your careers and things like that. Those things are what makes you who you are and are a part of your identity because God made you unique like that. The point I hope you'll remember in this whole assigned purpose and inherent purpose discussion is that both are part of your identity, but your inherent purpose doesn't change while your assigned purpose often does, okay? So to the second question, what does it look like to be a good wife or a godly wife? Do we have to live up to this Proverbs 31 woman? Well, the Proverbs 31 woman, she did it all. And she's like the Pinterest mom who puts all the custom costumes she's sewed for the school play and like on her Pinterest walls. And you feel terrible because you're the mom, you forgot to dry your kid's soccer jersey and you hung it out the window on the way to the game and pray it dries before you get there. True story. It's happened twice. And yeah, it dried mostly by the time we got there. But that's what happens when you're a busy mom. How do you live up to that? Like the Proverbs 31 sewing the costumes. Well, this Proverbs 31 woman, she got up early. She got everything ready before everyone else wakes up. And you just feel bad because you hit snooze like 3 times and then you throw your kids Pop-Tarts on your way out the door, right? So you're like, oh my gosh, I just can't do that. So is that what motherhood and being a wife looks like according to the Bible, or are we failing if we can't live up to that? So here's the deal. Being a good wife and mom isn't about how well you do something. It's about making sure you take your family's needs and you put them first. You serve your family well. And here's what I mean. There's been a debate about a woman's role in the world, and women have neglected their role in the home. And the Bible emphasizes the husband's role of taking care of the family, and it emphasizes the woman's role of taking care of her home. And I say this often, but it's worth saying again. If I teach everyone else the things of God and pour all of my time and energy into my ministry, writing, podcasting, and neglect my family, then I'm a fraud. And I am called by God to first serve my husband and my children before anyone else. Sometimes that's hard, and I have so much on my to-do list that I'm like trying to get out of my office and downstairs. And sometimes it's easy, but I'm always mindful of that balance and trying really hard to make sure that I give them what they need. And that means if we as women seek careers outside of our homes and neglect our family, then we're not stewarding our role as wife and mother well. But if we balance those two out, we're fine. We can't put all of the energy into the career and not have enough to give to our families. The Proverbs 31 woman is not someone to be copied. Like, it's not like, here, ladies, be this woman. But we are to strive to have the same goal that she had. And that's to take care of our families with intentionality and determination and drive and not be passive about it. There are many studies and things written about the Proverbs 31 woman. So if you want to dig more on that, go ahead. But I went ahead and just put in verses 10 through 31 so we can look at her character, her motivation, and her reputation in these verses, and then draw out how she is an example to all women. So it says this starting at verse 10. A wife of noble character who can find? She is far more precious than rubies. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he lacks nothing of value. She brings him good and not harm all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. She is like the merchant ships bringing her food from afar. She rises while it is still night to provide food for her household and portions for her maidservants. She appraises a field and buys it. From her earnings she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength and shows that her arms are strong. She sees that her gain is good and her lamp is not extinguished at night. She stretches out her hands to the distaff and grasps the spindle with her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for they are all clothed in scarlet. She makes coverings for her bed. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known at the city gate, where he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers sashes to the merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she can laugh at the days to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband praises her as well. Many daughters have done noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands and let her works praise her at the gates. So first, let's take a look at what it means to have noble character. That's identifying, the part of speech, noble. And if we identify the part of speech with noble, it helps us with the meaning. And in this case, noble is an adjective. So it's describing the woman. Noble can mean two things. It can mean belonging to her, like a class of hierarchy, political status. And it can also mean having or showing personal qualities or high moral principles and ideals. That's all per the Oxford Dictionary, by the way. Now, here's the thing about the Bible. It never emphasizes value or worth in correlation to our possessions or political standings. So this has to mean the latter. It means that she is a woman of personal qualities, high moral principles and ideals. She knows what she believes and what she stands for. Now, maybe the Proverbs 31 woman did come from a high social class, but that doesn't matter here because the passage goes on to describe her character and her reputation, and it shows that she is a woman rooted in an understanding of principles and values and her family's first. So already these words can convict us, right? Am I that way? Am I family first? Do I have these values and these principles of nurturing and being intentional with my family, with my home? Okay, so what makes her valuable and more precious than rubies is not necessarily what she does. It's in how she treats her husband and what kind of partner in life she is to him. And as you can see, he needs her partnership because he trusts her, right? And he lacks nothing because of her. So he's left these things into her care. Otherwise, why would he trust her with it? She oversees these things that Proverbs mentions with their finances and their family affairs. And then we can apply this to our marriages and ask ourselves, if our husband can say the same of us, does he trust me? Does he trust me with our goals, with our marriage, with our children, with our finances? Do I keep things from him that he wouldn't agree on? Or does he know that I'm taking care of business and he knows full well that I will take care of it in an honorable way? Maybe that's something to discuss also with your husband. In verse 14 to 19, we see she's industrious and hardworking. She obviously works outside of the home, but the key here is that she works for the good of her home. She first takes care of her family by rising while it's still dark outside, meaning it's early. She has to make good use of her time. So what I think a lot of women do is take this passage literally and say, well, I can't do that, so that must mean I'm not a good wife because I'm not getting up early. No one's asking you to do it the way that she does it. But being mindful and making good use of your time is more of a reflection to see here than just getting up at 5 a.m. every morning. Like, take the Bible literally where it's meant to be taken literally, and then apply it to those places in your life where it's meant to be applied and as a lesson to be learned. Because getting up at 5 doesn't necessarily make you a good wife. What are you doing with your time if you get up at 5, right? And I think a lot of times we have to ask ourselves, where am I spending my time throughout the day? And is it to the productivity of my home, or is it being non-productive by scrolling through social media all the time? That's just one area where we might clean up our time, right? And then I'll be honest, I hate it when women say this, like, oh yeah, you don't have to be perfect. I did say that at the beginning, but here's what I mean when I say you don't have to be perfect. By striving for perfection, we're never going to reach that. But to be okay with less than mediocre is also not okay. No one expects you to be perfect, okay? Like if you mess up, we understand that. It's okay if you have to get your kids a microwave dinner every now and then, and you walk around with your hair maybe in a messy bun instead of it being straightened out or blown out or curled or whatever. But it's not okay to accept the hot mess mentality, I guess you could say. I feel like that hot mess mentality, it's okay, Mom, you're just trying to survive. Yes, I do understand survival mode in motherhood. I have 3 boys, and the first 2 were 2 years old and newborn. It was tough. It was exhausting. I get that. There were days when I would just fall asleep driving to church softball. So I get it. But the hot mess mentality and just accepting that isn't the Proverbs 31 mentality, I guess, right? So here's the deal. Sometimes you do have to put down the spatula and order in. Sometimes you do have to throw some dry shampoo in your hair and walk out the door and just say, hey, I don't have time to wash it, but I'll put some dry shampoo in it and no one would know the difference. Sometimes you cut the prayers and the book reading down from 30 minutes to 10 because you're tired. I like to distinguish not the hot mess mom, but what matters between what matters most. Okay. I'm that person. I say, don't go for hot mess. Go for distinguish between what matters most. What matters is that you get dinner on the table, right? What matters most is that they eat. So it doesn't matter so much on how you do it. Let's not go Martha Stewart and Pinterest tonight. You just can't do that. What matters is that you do have this time with your kids where you pray and read. They need the Bible and they need praying. That's what matters. What matters most is that you get it in during the day, even if it's not for as long as you'd like. It doesn't have to be 30 minutes. What matters most is that you get it in, okay? And that's what I'm talking about. What matters is that you look presentable because you're a woman of God. What matters most is that you understand that sometimes presentable might be, like I said, a messy bun and not a blowout on your hair. It may be some eyeliner only and not like your makeup all done up, because that's what we have time for. I just don't like accepting that, I'm just a hot mess and that's okay. I have spit up on my shirt and I'm walking out the door. Now, have I had spit up on my shirt before? Yeah, and I taught kindergarten with it. And the teacher was like, what is that on your arm? You didn't know it was there, but it happens, right? But you still have to say, I don't believe the Proverbs 31 woman's motto was, it's okay to be a hot mess mama. I just don't. But let me tell you, young mama, something that I learned because my boys are older. It gets easier. It does. It seems like it will always be hard and exhausting, but it's not going to always be that way. I promise you. The time is going to go by, and day by day, they will become more independent, and you're going to get more downtime. I was exhausted all the time when my boys were young. I would be like, something's wrong with me. I'm just super tired, and I could not get with my first, I labored, and then I had to have a C-section, and I just didn't regain strength or energy for he wasn't a good sleeper. He had reflux. So I was beat, and I didn't have a lot of time and energy for my husband. And it was a little stressful on our marriage at times because I did feel like my boys sucked a lot of the energy out of me because motherhood is selfless. It requires a lot. You try to be everything to everyone, and you feel like, gosh, I felt like one arm was on the kids and one arm was with the husband, and there was tug of war. And I was in the middle trying to figure out which way I was going to go. My Bible time and study time looked a lot different than it does now. I didn't read books because I was exhausted. I read books all the time now, but my kids are older. So my brain could not take book reading at that time. You have to do what matters most and don't focus on the details as much as the big picture. But to sit back and say it's okay to be a hot mess mom, you're not a hot mess. Remember who you are. God created you in his image. You are a woman of God, and you just won't be a Pinterest mom of God, for a while. You won't be the Pinterest woman of God. You won't be the fashionista right now. Or maybe the kids need to get a little bit older and then you start rocking it again and this clothes that you feel you look better in or whatever. But you can still look cute in yoga pants and a cute top with boots. Okay? I mean, we do what we got to do, but we do it realistically and we do what matters most. And we don't accept the hot mess mama. I just feel like it's so tired and overdone. And I don't feel like it's the Proverbs 31 woman at all. The Proverbs 31 woman was a good wife and mom because she put her family first. Verse 27 says, she watches over the affairs of her household. This is where many women go wrong, okay? We don't watch over the affairs of our household. Now, if you want to work outside the home, again, no one says you can't. I'm not discouraging it. I work outside the home. I've taught. I just balance that out by working part-time and being home. And I work within the home now, but I'm up in my office a lot throughout the day. Obviously, we don't see the Proverbs 31 woman barefoot and pregnant. She did work. She was a wise investor. She watched over the affairs of her household and still did all the things. So if you neglect your home, though, that means the people in the home, then you're not doing what God wants you to do. So let's look at the definition of the words affairs and idle, because she didn't eat the bread of idleness and she watched over the affairs of her home. Affairs means events taking place or what's happening or occurring under your roof. So mama should know what the kids are doing, where the kids are, who the kids are with, what the kids are watching, how the kids talk, what the kids need help with. She needs to talk to the kids, watch the kids, pray for the kids, teach the kids, guard the kids, and keep the kids in regard to who else gets to influence the kids. The wife should pray for her husband, talk to her husband, spend time with her husband, meet her husband's needs, tell her husband what her needs are, encourage him, listen to him, guard him, protect him from others and what they say about him, defend him, partner with him in this life. And he obviously can't do it without you because God gave you to him. And then in verses 28 through 29, you see the effect or the result of her faithfulness and her faithfulness in living family first. So let me stress verses 28 and 29 when her children rise up and call her blessed, and her husband says many women have done well, but you excel them all, things like that. That doesn't happen when your kids are 3 or 8 or 10 or 17 or 19. I mean, my boys do say thank you and pour it on thick for Mother's Day, but this isn't something realized in the moment that you're cooking all the dinners and you're, teaching them all the lessons or taking them to school and driving back and forth. We know that, right? Because we didn't appreciate our own moms in the moment until we got older and looked back at what she did for us. And that's often because of what we do for our own families. So the praise shown here is given to a consistent, persistent, intentional woman who diligently takes care of her family. Everything this Proverbs 31 woman did was because of her family, not in spite of her family. There's a huge difference. So then we have verses 30 to 31 where it talks about charm and beauty. Again, the Proverbs 31 woman wasn't praised because of how she looked or because of her fake hospitality or her demeanor. She was a woman with depth, and although her outward beauty perished, a sad reality that I wrestle with daily, but her inner beauty made her memorable and praiseworthy and noticed by all. And in Reflections of Eve, I tie this into what Peter said about the inner beauty and quiet disposition of a wife. So you can check that out if you want to. And then finally, why is feminism in conflict with a biblical worldview? If you've listened to my podcast long enough, you know I don't like the feminist ideology. I do not like the approach, the rank representation of women who talk about their reproductive rights, the way they degrade men. I'm not saying that women have always been treated well by men. We know they haven't. And in some cultures today, they are still second-class citizens. But feminism isn't going to empower them. I've said this too, and I'll say it again. If you truly believe what God said about you, you wouldn't need feminism to vouch for you. Feminist ideology conflicts with the biblical worldview. I'm also not saying that there aren't men out there who take advantage of women and treat them poorly. That would be foolish for me to say that. But if feminism contradicts a biblical worldview, it still won't fix the problem. And what gets me is when women complain about men or talk about men being aggressive. Look around. Every one of those men were birthed by a woman. What contribution are we making as women into the lives of our men or our boys, our children? What influence do you have? You have a great influence. Statistically, moms have a huge influence on the character of her children, boys included. We are to raise them to be strong men of God who protect their families and fight their battles. There is a difference between strong men of God and how the world views strength, okay? Strong men battle their impulses, and they recognize that they will have struggles because they are men. So I'm putting this part in here about feminism because the culture itself has impacted the church. And I know some Christian women are confused about where to stand on these issues as wives and as moms of boys. I've seen some Christian women identify as feminists, and I really would like to know what is appealing about the feminist ideology that you don't see in the Bible. If you think feminism shows women their worth, it doesn't show them the right kind of worth. I would need to see where feminism shows them their worth. Feminism says you are worthy, like you're worth it because you're female. The Bible says you're worth it and valuable because you're created in the image of God. There's no higher value placed on your life when you're created into God's image or in the image of God. Feminism says you should be treated equally because you can do anything a man can do. The Bible says you are equal and you can do things a man can't do. It also says men can do things women can't do. And thank God for that. It shows and celebrates our differences. Men are protectors of their families. Women are protectors of their homes. Men guard the family and provide for them. Women guard the affairs of her household and instruct the people in it. The saying is, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, if you want it to. The problem is women don't want to rock the cradle. We, and by we, I mean women in general, advocate for the killing of babies so that we don't have to rock the cradle because we want to rule the world. Well, that's not how the saying goes, and it doesn't work that way. I want to close this out by recapping what I hope I get across in this episode. You don't have to do it perfectly. Being a wife or mom is hard, but it is the best job you will ever do. It's tiring, it's thankless, for a while anyway, but it is an investment that yields the greatest return when you put your family first. So what I don't want you to worry about is doing it the Proverbs 31 way. Like, how do I do it her way? It's in the Bible. We should read Proverbs 31 and take lessons from her. I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm saying if you're trying to use that and be a carbon copy, you're already setting yourself up for something that's going to be tough to attain to. It's a guide for us to see the attitude, keeping things in the right perspective, putting our families first, and partnering with our husband so he trusts us and depends on us is the way to do it. That will look differently for all of us. That might be Pinterest mom and Martha Stewart mom for some. It might be semi-homemade for others. And it might be a phone order for those of us who are tired and just want to get home and eat dinner around the table with the family. And maybe at different times in our lives, we're all of the above. But what matters most, it's that you're there together as a family and that you're listening to them and you know what their needs are and you're helping fill those needs. When you ask me the question, what is a good wife and how do I be one? I'm not going to give you a list of boxes to check. I'm going to tell you what I felt like God told me when I only had 2 boys at the time and they were very little. We just got home from buying groceries, and all the moms who buy groceries with little ones, you know what I'm talking about, right? It can be a challenge. But I remember that day snapping at them, yelling at them. I lost my patience and I was unloading the groceries and I was like feeling terrible. And my prayer was, God, help me be a good mom. See, I use the word good. I just want to be a good mom. I feel like a terrible mom because I yelled at the boys. And the Lord's reply was so gentle and convicting because in my heart, I felt like the Lord was telling me, it's not about being a good mom or a good wife. It's about being a woman of God. Because when you're a woman of God first, you're going to give your best to being a wife. You're going to give your best to being a mom. Okay. And that's what this goes back to inherent purpose. It's not about checking the boxes of the Proverbs 31 woman and says, that's what made me a good wife or a good mom. It's about being a woman of God, a woman created in the image of God, and realizing that in my inherent purpose, being a woman of God makes me good at all the other things that I do in life. The things I choose to do outside of my home and the things I do within my home. That's all the Proverbs 31 woman did. She was a woman of noble character first. Her performance came later. What matters is that you serve your family well. What matters most is that you serve God first. I hope this episode encouraged you. You're not a hot mess, okay? And don't accept the hot mess message. You're a woman of God. Walk like one, talk like one, and you'll be praised by those who love you most as you do. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave a 5-star rating and a review. I read every one of those reviews, and I appreciate all of the support. If you have any questions for me, email me at hello@shandafulbright.com, and I'll catch you on the next one.